But so good to be here. You know, and we as a church, we've been on an incredible journey this year so far, and we're so excited about the ways that the Lord has been meeting us as a church and will continue to meet us. But we are starting a brand new series today called Restored. And while on one hand it is a new series, it is also still in line with the overall thing that we believe God is wanting to do in the life of our church this year. And that is, for 2023, the word for our year is ignite. Where we are trusting God to ignite something in us, something that is unmistakably Him. As we've been singing today, to fan into flame a passion for His name, so that we get beyond the routine, we get beyond the religiosity, we fall in love with Jesus again. He is doing a work in our lives, both individually and together as a church, and that is going to change everything. That is going to change how I see my Mondays, my Wednesdays, how I see my family, and how I see my neighbors. And we are asking God to interact with us, to engage with us, as He ignites something in us. And that is really how the series is going to help us, as the Lord restores something deep within us. But here's the thing about this coming series. While I do believe that the series is going to help us interact with our living Jesus Christ, many of us are going to resist it, because we're going to find it painful and difficult for the following reasons. When we see Jesus engaging people in Scripture, whether we think about, it doesn't matter who you think about, whether we think about the crowds and all of them hearing the good news of the kingdom, which is very different to the kinds of stuff they had heard their religious leaders speak about. Whether we think about the woman caught in the well, caught in adultery, all right, at the well, and Jesus engaging her at her point of shame. Whether we think about people being, healed and Jesus engaging them at their points of weakness. Whether we think about Zacchaeus and Jesus engaging him at his points of greed. Even Paul, who was this incredible intellectual, when he encountered Jesus, in all of these people's stories, it was not in their strength that Jesus engaged them, but in their weaknesses and in their points of pain. But we don't like doing that. We're used to hurting and people hurting us and maybe taking advantage of our pain or misunderstanding our pain. So we get so used to bottling it up and locking it up. And we don't know how to, as we were singing this morning, let Jesus have His way in our lives. And to maybe kind of bring us into this place, I want to just talk about something that so many of you are familiar with, and that is in December last year that my wife had an ice skating incident and she broke her hip. You see, the way it worked out was our school just closed a few days earlier than the other schools. And so when we went to the ice skating rink, it was just so open. And so for a change, we never had people cutting across us, and we could pretty much do what we wanted. And we were having an amazing time as a family. In fact, Bianca came up to me halfway through the session and she said to me, "Lovey," because that's what she calls me. You don't get to call me that. She said, "This is the most fun I have had in years." All right, this was the peak before the valley, right? And so towards the end of the session, the boys and I were on the side of the ice skating rink, and she came around and she looked towards us, she smiled at us, and we don't know exactly how it happened, but she went from upright and moving forward to flat on her side with a broken hip. Now, if you think about it, this is not just like falling on this floor, you're lying on cold, wet ice. Which on one hand, I suppose, helped with the pain. Immediately, she knew that something was wrong with her. And because of that, we couldn't move her. But also, I'm on ice skates. And so I don't want to put an ice skate through her temple in my attempt to try and help her. So by hook or by crook, and with some help from others, we were able to get her to the side. The people were able to get her onto a stretcher. We called an ambulance, and from there we were able to go to a hospital, and they were able to operate. Now, for those of you who know her and who have seen her around, I mean, you would never say that 4 months ago she had a hip replacement surgery. She's recovered so well. In fact, last week we were away and we were on a farm with these incredible hills, and we could walk these hills up and down, and she was doing so well. But now imagine she felt and she knew that there was something drastically wrong with her body. And imagine she said, you know what I need? I need someone to fix me. Stephen, take me home. Now imagine I take her home and, she's uncomfortable sitting. She's uncomfortable standing. She's in pain lying down. And she's like, I really need to do something about this. I really need someone to help me and to fix me. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to binge watch Netflix. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go online shopping, and I'm going to surround myself with things that I like and things that are comfortable. All the time complaining, something really wrong. And I really need someone to help me to fix me. I mean, that's absurd. Because we know the only option for you in that moment is to face the surgeon's knife. But that knife is not meant to harm, it is meant to heal. But it is painful. Healing is painful. The recovery is painful. Taking those new steps is painful, and it is incredibly frustrating, but it is all part of the healing process. And I think that is how many of us try and relate to Jesus. We know that at some level we are honestly, and I do think we are sincerely saying, Jesus, I want you to encounter me. We need your power. We need your strength. We need your grace. We need your love. We need your presence and power. But then what do? We go and surround ourselves with the things that we can control. And we binge watch and we go shopping. Even when we come to church, we want comfortable church. We want safe church. We want controlled church. And all the time, what we're doing is we're protecting ourselves from God engaging us where we actually need Him, because that would require us being vulnerable and potentially engaging a process of pain. But that is why the series is called Restored. Because I'm looking so forward to where our stories are. God has done something in me. God has healed something in me. God has restored something in me. And yes, it was painful. But wow, God has encountered me in such a powerful way. So I don't know if I'm kind of giving you all an excuse not to come to church next week, but that is where we are going. And this week, we are going to be engaging those who are sitting here this morning, saying something along these lines. You want to know where my pain is? I'm angry. I'm angry. And here's the thing, for some of you, the anger, you've got like a vault inside of you. And you know that you have shoved all your pain and all your anger in that vault, and you're well rehearsed when it comes to living this life without letting that anger out. But you know, if that vault door had to be cracked open, just a crack, man, all hell is going to break loose. Some of you are like, everyone knows I'm an angry guy or an angry woman. I just wear my anger on a sleeve. This is who I am. Deal with it. Others of you are maybe I'm not quite there. But Stephen, now that you talk about it, yeah, I've got some things that have got me ticked. Maybe it was as recent as something this morning with the family. Maybe it's something that has happened more recently, or maybe it goes years back. In most cases, there are probably going to be a number of things that we are still carrying around with us. But we know that there's some anger here. And here's the thing, if you think about it, here's why if we don't let God into our angry spaces, think about what that does in a relationship. Things are good with you and a friend, with you and your husband and wife, or you and your kids. And suddenly something goes wrong and anger has entered the situation. Even if you get to the point where you learn how to deal kind of kindly with each other, underneath the surface, you know there's still anger. What has that done to the relationship? And in the same way, we are singing this morning, Lord, have your way. And God is saying, okay, let me into your anger. We're like, no. Lord, encounter me. Okay, come, let me restore you where it hurts. No. And can you see how, man, we can have our arms raised and we can be so sincere in our prayers this morning and yet keep God at arm's length because we don't want to go there. But guess what? You're going to have an opportunity to go there this morning because anger can be, whether we look at the scriptures or whether we look at our own story, so destructive. Listen to James 1 verses 19 to 20. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, and slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Now, immediately here in this verse, we see that anger in and of itself is not necessarily sinful. What this verse does say is, but become slow to become angry. Why? Well, the answer is in the rest of this verse. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Ephesians 4:26 says something very similar. In your anger, do not sin. Think about the last few arguments you've had where anger has come up within you. Think about the last few moments you've been triggered, whether it's on the road or in conversation or at work or online. And think about what the anger did inside of you. Did it produce righteousness? Did the anger lead you to greater empathy, greater love, greater understanding, greater compassion? And we all know that the answer is 99 out of 100 times, no, it didn't. Because as this verse says, anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. And so usually we look back to the argument or the encounter, be it in person or online, and we realize, well, it was at the moment where the anger welled up inside of me, that's where things took a wrong turn. That's normally what we see in our lives and our hearts. This is why Ecclesiastes 7 verse 9 says, do not be quickly provoked in your spirits, for anger resides in the lap of fools. On average, anger is going to cause us to respond foolishly. Now, when we're talking about anger, some of you are like, Stephen, I've been in church for a while, and I know that there's this thing called righteous anger. And so the anger that I've got is righteous anger. Doesn't God get angry? Didn't Jesus get angry? So you know what? My anger is righteous anger. And you're 100% right. God does get angry. Jesus got angry. But let me kind of probe this with you. You see, the first thought that I have is, when God gets angry in Scripture, and when we see Jesus responding with appropriate levels of anger, what is happening in that moment is he's not blowing his top. He's not losing his cool. He's not throwing a tantrum. He's not losing control of his faculties because of the emotion he's experiencing in the moment. Rather, it is a measured, righteous, holy, and at times I'd even say loving response in the situation. After much patience. After much patience, the kind of patience that you and I hardly ever exhibit. So that's the first thought that I have. The second thought that I have about comparing our righteous anger to God's righteous anger is God is perfect, and therefore He, in His perfection, has the ability to be angry without sinning. Do you? Do you have the ability to be angry without sinning? See, God can be angry and still do the right thing. God also has the ability to have perfect perspective, perfect wisdom. And maybe the cause of your anger is something righteous. Maybe it's a false doctrine. Maybe it's sin. Oh, and by the way, we tend to get angry about other people's sin, but hardly ever about our own sin. Right? So maybe there is a righteous, in inverted commas, reason for your anger. But don't be too quick to justify your tantrum and your mood and your response and how you choose to respond by saying, but it's righteous anger. Because I don't know if we get that right. So that's the first thought. Stephen, what about righteous anger? The second thought is, you know what, Stephen, I'm sitting here this morning and you are 100% right. I have some anger deep within my heart. But it's not because someone cut me off in the traffic. It's not because of something trivial. It's not because we're not in our normal venue this morning. Listen, Stephen, if you knew what happened to me, if you knew what I've had to endure, if you knew what has been taken from me, if you knew what I've had to grieve, you would understand. You would probably agree with me that I have every right to be angry. And you know what? Maybe if I knew all of your stories, maybe I would. But here's the thing. You see, anger, and this is why anger in and of itself is not a sin. Anger alerts us to something. It communicates something to us. And it usually is trying to say something is going wrong. It's kind of like sticking your hand in a fire and your pain sensors telling you, take your hand out the fire. But you'd be considered crazy to say, whoa, the pain is doing its job, and then you leave your hand in the fire. Because we do that with our anger. Our anger has alerted us that there is a pain in our lives. There is a pain in our relationships. And yet we hold on to it. And so my question to you is, has that helped you? Honestly, has it helped you with your peace? Has it helped you in your relationships with others, with God? Has it helped you with forgiveness? Has it helped you with your ability to receive grace from God? Or has it done the contrary, hardening your heart to God and to others and even to self? And this is why we need Jesus to encounter. You see, underneath all of our anger is a point of pain. And just like Jesus encountered those many people 2,000 years ago, meeting them at their point of pain, so Jesus wants to say, let me meet you there at your point of pain. Let me restore you there. And only He can do that. So how can we move towards Jesus with our anger? And here's just a few thoughts for you this morning. And I know some of this maybe sounds like, Stephen, I've heard this before. Well, 90% of preaching is reminding and not new things. And so here are some reminders for how we can engage Jesus with our anger. And the first thought is this: trust Jesus with the expression of your anger. You know, when it comes to some of these emotions that we experience in life, if we think about how we tend to respond badly when we're feeling these emotions, here's a truth that is just generally helpful. It's not from the Bible, but I think it rings true, and that is this: if you don't speak it out, you're going to act it out. Hey, baby, is everything okay? I'm fine. Listen, if you don't speak it out, everyone's still going to know about it. You're going to act it out. And obviously, the deeper it goes, the more we're going to act it out in broken and painful ways. But here's the thing, we're saying, trust Jesus with the expression of your anger. Oh no, but Stephen, when we go and we engage with a very important person, let's just imagine we go and engage. I was going to use the queen, but now she's not with us anymore. So we're going to go engage the king. Do I just kind of rock up in my board shorts and my, unbrushed teeth and messy hair? No. We get nice clothes. We learn how to say the right things, the do's and the don'ts, the etiquettes of the moments. And well, Stephen, if that's how we are to respond to a human king, how much more are we to respond to the King of the universe? And so in prayer, it's all about, let me make sure that everything on the outside looks okay. Doesn't matter what's going on the inside, as long as it looks like everything's all right. And then we come with our pious prayers and the right phrases and the right requests and the right Bible verses. And so I want to say to you, have you read the Psalms? And I don't just mean Psalm 1 and Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. I mean, literally, have you read the Psalms? You need to notice how many times the various authors of the Psalms are pouring out angst and hurt and pain and confusion. Let me give you some examples. Psalm 13 verses 2. How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Psalm 44 verses 24. Why do you hide your face and forget our misery and oppression? Stephen, is that in the Bible? Are we allowed to pray like that? I want to suggest we are allowed to pray like that. Rather, bring the pain that is inside of you to our God and King, than pretend everything is okay and cut off His engagement with your pain and His ability to touch you and restore you. And so I believe we need to learn to articulate our pain and our anger to God. And this is hard in and of itself, because so often we can just say, oh God, I'm so angry, amen. Anger is like an iceberg. Anger is pointing towards something else. As we read the Psalms, they have, and the prophets, by the way, they have specific complaints. And so I want to suggest to you, by the way, this is what a good counselor, a good psychologist does. Ask you the kind of questions so that you can get what's in, out. So I want to suggest to you that you make some time with the Lord and you say, Lord, I'm going to bring my anger to you and I'm going to trust you with the expression of my anger. So Lord, help me see what has really got me ticked, and get out a pen or get out a tablet and start writing. And get as articulate and as clear as possible. And you're like, oh, I can't say this to God. Yes, you can and you must. He is our great physician. He's not going to reject you because you think you're not being holy enough. In fact, He is the one who took on your pain. And so I want to suggest that maybe, last weekend we got some of those wire crosses for those of you who did Easter weekend with us. Maybe as you write things down, you look at what you've written down through the lens of the cross. Or maybe some of you have done this, and we stopped doing this in our children's church years, but I think some of us as adults need something like this. You write it down on a piece of paper, bring it to the Lord and burn it. Just some act of getting what is in, out, but with the Lord. And you know what picture I get here? This has never worked with me, by the way. But we see this in movies, and maybe some of you have experienced this. You know when someone's really angry, and there is tears and shouting, and maybe even the fists are going, and the person that they're venting their anger to responds by walking towards them with open arms. And even as this other person is yelling at them and shouting and screaming, and this person is just like kind of taking some blows at the moment, eventually the heart of the other person breaks. And they're able to just rest and sob in the arms of someone who is accepting them fully in their anger and showing them such great love. And that is something along the lines of what God wants to be able to do with us as we trust Him with the expression of our anger. Number 2, we need to trust Jesus with forgiveness. Long before we start saying, yeah, but Jesus, do you know what this person did? Maybe you have every righteous reason to have gotten angry in the first place. Maybe you have truly been sinned against. And we can learn to pour that out to God, taking us back to point 1. But all too often, in our anger, we sin. And we make poor decisions, and we move away from the relationship, and we hurt with our words, and we hurt with our decisions, and sometimes not the person who's hurt us, but the innocent bystanders, our kids and other people in the family. And so let's do business with God so that He can clean your heart. He can give you a clean slate. And in the same way, just like we did when we learned to express our anger to God, trusting Him with our emotions, let's bring to God the specifics. You know, God, yeah. Folks, I know I've heard enough heartbreaking stories to know some of the pain that some of us have experienced. But Lord, even so, here's how I have responded in my pain and in my brokenness and in my anger. And it has started a perpetual cycle in my heart that I just can't seem to escape from. Psalm 86 verses 5 says, you, Lord, though, are forgiving and good, abounding in love to all who call to you. See, part of your restoration is to be forgiven much. Part of you learning to love much is to be forgiven much, to quote Jesus. Part of you learning and getting the emotional and spiritual resources to forgive others is to be forgiven much yourself. And so let's have the courage to say, Lord, despite what happened to me, here is where I was wrong. Number 3, and this might sound strange at first, but I'll unpack it for us. Trust Jesus with your needs. One of the best books that I've ever written, other than the Bible, on transformation, is a book by Dallas Willard called Renovation of the Heart. I'm not too sure if we have it in our church library, not available today. Man, it's heavy reading, it is heavy lifting, because it's not just a few quick little platitudes. It is deep soul work. You can spend a year working on this book, Renovation of the Heart by Dallas Willard. And he's just got such a brilliant analysis of the cause behind maybe not all of our anger, but much of our anger. And his analysis is this, that most often the reason I get angry is because I don't get my way. I don't get my way. You know, one of the ways you can find this out for you, have you ever had, I'm not going to ask you for hands because all of our hands would go up. You know those angry fantasies? After the argument, what I should have said is. And in your mind as you're driving home or you're lying asleep at night, you're so articulate. And you just lay it down. Man, like your mind is on form and your words come out like swords. And you know how this person responds in your fantasies? Oh, Stephen, you're so right. I was so wrong. Been there, done that. But just think about what's happened even in our imaginations. I've made it about me. I've eliminated all of my role with regards to the hurt and the pain. And I've taken this other person who in many times I dearly love, and I've reduced them to the single thing that they did wrong. I've dehumanized them in my imagination. Right? Think about the many arguments, how so often in our arguments it is all about me doing everything to show that I'm right. Because being right is more important than being one with you. Or it's my desire to be in control. The things that I feel like I should be in control over, they slip out of my control. Or there's something that I want and I don't get it, and so I get angry. Or there's something that I think things should be done in a certain way, maybe a core value to me, and this person doesn't respond in the same way. And so I get angry. I think even in our so-called righteous anger, at the end of the day, we make it about me. What I want, the fact that I'm right and you're wrong. And here's the thing, and this is where his analysis of our anger continues. Not only is at the end of the day, this is about me not getting what I want, but I feel these feelings and something in me becomes convinced that I have to satisfy these feelings, which once again comes down to me getting what I want. Because let's not kid. Sometimes blowing your top, it feels so good. That release. Just taking the filter off and saying what I want to say. Toothpaste is out of the tube, right? Proverbs 29:11 expresses this when it says, fools give full vent to their rage. So Dallas Willard says, okay, if we're going to trust God and Jesus with these emotions, on one hand, especially if anger is something that you walk with regularly in your life, you kind of vacillate between letting it all out and trying to not let it all out, and trying to bottle it up and prevent it from coming out in case I inflict more damage on the relationship, right? And we go between these two extremes. Now, this might sound similar, but I think it is so different when he suggests, well, why don't we learn how to trust the way of Jesus? This is how he says it. What if we learn to accept with confidence in God that I do not immediately have to have my way? And that releases me from the great pressure that anger, unforgiveness, and the need to retaliate imposes upon my life. Elsewhere, Jesus calls it dying to self, which is very different to bottling it all up. I have this need, and it is so powerful right now. Oh, but Jesus, I don't have to express this. Help that die. Just help that die. And let us get on a path of self-denial with Jesus when it comes to our emotions. Now, at each of these points, all of these points are moving us towards trusting Jesus. Trusting Jesus with the expression of my pain and anger. Trusting Jesus with my prayers. Trusting Jesus with forgiveness. Trusting Jesus with his ability just to help me, to quote John Owen, mortify the flesh. Help that part of me to slowly be starved of oxygen so that slowly that part of me starts to die and have no life of itself. We need Jesus for all of those steps, but I think there's one more, and this is where I want us to start wrapping up this morning. And that is where we learn to trust Jesus with the pain of your anger. This is where the thing that has caused your anger is just indescribably painful to you. Or maybe the thing or the person that caused the anger wasn't that great, but it started a cycle of retribution and response and sinful and brokenness responses, and now you are experiencing magnified pain in your anger. And sometimes for so many of us, the pain behind our anger is so big, Stephen, I can't even hear those first 3 points. Just like Bianca on the ice. Let's get you home. Let's try and help you. No, but the pain is so great, I need help. So we're saying, Stephen, the pain is so great. Jesus, the pain is so great, I need help. And I think the good news is, Jesus wants to meet you there. He's not going to put up with your normal justification, but if you only knew. He's just interested in, but are you going to trust me with your pain, with your anger, with your forgiveness? Are you going to bring it all to me and allow me in to this cage in your heart? Where we get to say, I'm so, as a result of this, I'm so broken inside. This anger and this pain has robbed me of so much life, so much joy, so much in terms of relationships with others and with God. And here's one more thought why many of us may find this difficult, especially if we've been carrying pain around for so long. Many of us can start to have a Stockholm Syndrome relationship with our anger. Stockholm Syndrome is when the captive falls in love with the captor. Despite the abuse. This anger's been in my heart for so long. And yes, it has robbed me. And yes, it has destroyed me. But I don't know what I'd do without it. Some of us make anger part of our identity. And so as much as we know letting go is the right thing, it's just so hard. And here's where we need to have a right understanding of who Jesus is. You see, we're not coming to Him, and He's not going to respond like our school principal, not judging any school principals in the room, or our teachers, or sometimes our parents, and sometimes our friends, and kind of give us a clap around the ear. How could you be so stupid, man? Bring it to me. Let me do what only I can do. Trust me. Trust me to heal and to restore. And so for us this morning, we do have some time. And I don't want to move beyond this. And as I've mentioned a number of times this year, you know, there are going to be opportunities for us in church to, as far as at least Riverside goes, maybe get appropriately uncomfortable. Because I know, I've sat in that seat. Everything that I've heard is 100% right. Thank you for the great message. Go home unchanged. But what if Jesus wants to encounter you here this morning? What if He wants to start to work with you here this morning? And so I'm going to ask that we all close our eyes, and I'm going to just try lead us to introspect a little bit and be real and vulnerable and honest with God. And then in time, also give us an opportunity to respond to Jesus this morning. Just by the way, we haven't mentioned a thing this morning about how to deal with those who have hurt us. And I just want to put that on ice. Let's deal with God first. Let us become recipients of His grace first. And then let that point of restoration become the resource from which we can then go and even think about engaging others. So just as music is playing softly, think about in your own mind, in your own heart, that first point, that first thought, trusting Jesus with the expression of your anger. You know, Jesus, as I've been sitting here this morning, there have been a number of things bubbling up to the surface of my heart. Just reflect that to Him. He knows, but He needs you to know. He wants you to have the courage to trust Him